That uniform is just theatrical costume. Sir, economy class is more appropriate for your budget. That's what the airline manager told Sergeant Hartford as he denied the Royal Guard his first-class seat. But one phone call from the humiliated serviceman would soon ground every plane in Terminal 5, so who did he dial to? Before we answer that, press the subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from now. Without further ado, let's get into it. The polished black boots of Sergeant Thomas Hartford moved with practiced precision across the gleaming floor of Heathrow International Airport's main terminal. His scarlet tunic and navy trousers stood in stark contrast to the casual attire of travelers rushing past his bare skin cap, adding nearly a foot to his already impressive height. Every eye in the vicinity turned to watch as he passed the unmistakable uniform of the Queen's Royal Guard, commanding attention. Without a single word, Hartford maintained perfect posture. His white-gloved hands carrying a single leather travel bag. His face remained impassive despite the stares and occasional whispers that followed him. 15 years of standing guard at Buckingham Palace had taught him to ignore distractions, whether they were tourists waving cameras in his face or businessmen casting sidelong glances at what they clearly considered a theatrical costume, rather than one of the nation's most prestigious uniforms. He was traveling to Edinburgh on official duty, a ceremonial guard exchange between royal residences that happened quarterly. Normally, such travel would be coordinated through military transport, but an urgent schedule change had necessitated booking a commercial flight. His commanding officer had arranged first-class accommodation due to the last-minute nature of the trip and the importance of his arrival in proper condition. Hartford approached the first-ass check-in counter, standing patiently in line behind a businessman engrossed in his phone. When his turn came, he stepped forward with the same disciplined movement that characterized his every action. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority developed through years of command. "Sergeant Thomas Hartford, Queen's Guard. I have a first-class reservation on the 1040 to Edinburgh." He placed his military ID, passport, and ticket confirmation on the counter with precise alignment. The counter agent, Rebecca Norton, according to her name badge, looked up and froze momentarily at the sight of the full ceremonial uniform before her. Her professional smile faltered as her eyes darted from Hartford's bearskin cap to his documentation and back again. "One moment, please," she said, her voice suddenly strained as she picked up her phone and turned slightly away from the counter. "Martin, I need you at first-class check-in." "Yes." Now, as Rebecca spoke in hushed tones on the phone, Hartford stood motionless, his expression betraying nothing. Years of maintaining ceremonial composure through rain heat and the endless prodding of tourists had perfected his ability to remain stoic under scrutiny. Within minutes, a man in a tailored suit approached. Martin Coleman, the supervising manager, eyed Hartford with poorly concealed suspicion. "Is there a problem?" Hartford inquired, his tone remaining professionally neutral. "Sir, may I ask the purpose of your attire?" Coleman gestured vaguely toward the ceremonial uniform. "I'm on official duty traveling between royal residences," Hartford explained, indicating his documentation. "My commanding officer arranged the booking." Coleman examined the ticket confirmation with exaggerated scrutiny, his lips pursed. "This is highly irregular. We don't typically see military personnel in ceremonial dress on commercial flights. The schedule change was unexpected. I am due in Edinburgh by evening." Coleman leaned closer to Rebecca, whispering something that Hartford could still hear. "Clearly call security. We need additional verification." Rebecca nodded, picking up the phone again. Hartford remained composed, though he was keenly aware of other passengers watching the uncomfortable exchange. This wasn't the first time his uniform had elicited suspicion, rather than respect outside military contexts. Several minutes later, two security officers approached Daniels and Matthews according to their badges. Unlike Coleman, Officer Daniels immediately straightened his posture slightly upon seeing Hartford, a subtle gesture of respect. "That didn't go unnoticed, sir." Daniels addressed Hartford, his tone professional but apologetic. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, but we've been asked to verify your documentation." "Of course," Hartford replied calmly. "I understand protocol must be followed," Coleman interjected. "We need to verify that this uniform is authorized. There have been incidents of unauthorized individuals wearing ceremonial outfits." "I can assure you," Hartford began, but Coleman cut him off. "Security will need to confirm your identity and authorization to travel in this manner." Coleman stated firmly, "Please step aside." Hartford noted the discomfort on Officer Daniels' face, as he gestured toward a more private screening area. "This way, Sergeant," Daniels said quietly as they moved away from the counter. Hartford caught a hushed exchange between Daniels and Matthews. "This is ridiculous," Matthews muttered. "My brother served with the Royal Artillery. You don't question a guard like this." "I know," Daniels replied under his breath, "but orders are orders." In the private screening area, Officer Daniels conducted the identity verification with evident reluctance. He carefully checked Hartford's military ID against his passport and ticket. "Information, everything appears in order," Sergeant Daniels stated, returning the documents. "I apologize for the inconvenience. No apology necessary." Hartford replied, his tone, "Even security measures exist for good reason." Before they could conclude, Coleman entered the room, his expression still skeptical. "Have we confirmed this individual's identity?" he asked as though Hartford weren't present. "Yes, sir," Matthews responded. "His documentation is legitimate. Military ID confirms he's Sergeant Thomas Hartford of the Queen's Guard, traveling on official orders." Coleman circled Hartford, examining the ceremonial uniform with undisguised disdain. "All this pageantry seems excessive for a simple flight," he remarked. "Do taxpayers know how much these costumes cost?" Hartford remained at parade rest, his eyes fixed forward. "This uniform represents centuries of tradition and service to the Crown." "Sir, it's worn with permission from the highest authorities." "Well, it's causing a disruption in my terminal," Coleman replied dismissively. "People are staring, taking photos. It's a security concern back at the counter." Coleman reviewed Hartford's ticket information with Rebecca, while a small audience of travelers watched with increasing interest. The manager's demeanor had shifted from cautious to openly hostile, perhaps emboldened by his position of authority. "This first-ass ticket," Coleman said, holding the confirmation as though it were counterfeit. "How exactly did you acquire it?" "As I explained earlier, my commanding officer arranged it," Hartford replied evenly. "And you expect us to believe the military regularly books first-class tickets for its personnel?" Coleman's tone was dripping with skepticism. "These seats cost upwards of 400 millimeters. Hartford maintained his composure due to the urgent nature of the reassignment and the ceremonial requirements of my position. "Yes, the Crown does occasionally authorize appropriate accommodations." A woman in line behind them spoke up. "For heaven's sake, he's a Royal Guard. Why are you treating him like a criminal?" Coleman turned briefly. "Mom, I assure you we're following standard security protocols." His attention returned to Hartford. "How exactly did you afford this ticket?" "Personally, our records show. It was purchased yesterday." "I didn't purchase it personally. It was arranged through military channels." Hartford explained for the third time. "So you have no proof of purchase?" "The confirmation of my orders should be sufficient proof." Coleman exchanged glances with Rebecca, who seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. "I'm afraid we cannot verify the legitimacy of this ticket. For security reasons, we'll need to reassign you to economy class." A ripple of disbelief passed through the onlookers. Hartford remained still, processing the blatant discrimination dressed as security concern. "Is there a specific regulation I've violated?" Hartford asked calmly. "Sir, this isn't a debate. We have full discretion over flight assignments for security purposes," Coleman stated firmly. "Your unusual attire and inability to verify the source of your premium ticket raise red flags. You can either accept economy seating or reschedule your travel." Hartford understood the reality of his situation. Making a scene would reflect poorly on the institution he represented, regardless of who was at fault. His training had prepared him for far worse indignities than an airline downgrade. "As you wish," Hartford responded with dignity. "I won't cause a scene." Coleman seemed relieved, perhaps having expected a confrontation. He quickly processed the seat reassignment, handing Hartford a new boarding pass for seat 24C in economy. As Hartford turned to leave, Officer Daniels approached, having witnessed the entire exchange. "Sergeant, I want to apologize," he said quietly. "This isn't right." "Thank you, officer," Hartford replied, "but some battles aren't worth fighting." Boarding the aircraft proved to be its own challenge. Hartford had to remove his bare skin cap to fit through the door carefully, tucking it under his arm. The narrow aisle barely accommodated his broad shoulders in the ceremonial tunic. Flight attendants stared in surprise as he made his way toward the back of the plane. When Hartford reached row 24, he found an elderly gentleman occupying the window seat. The man looked up and his eyes widened in recognition. "Well, I'll be damned," the man said, straightening in his seat. "A Queen's guard on my flight. Good morning, Sir," Hartford replied politely, as he stored his cap in the overhead compartment and maneuvered into the middle seat. "Walter Simmons," the man introduced himself, extending a weathered hand. "Royal Marines, retired, served 28 years before they put me out to pasture." Hartford shook his hand. "Sergeant Thomas Hartford, Queen's Guard?" Simmons smiled warmly. "I recognized the uniform immediately. My unit provided support for the changing of the guard back in 78 hottest. Some are on record, and you lads never flinched," as Hartford settled in, adjusting his tunic as best he could in the confined space. Simmons leaned closer. "I saw what happened up front," he said quietly. "That pencil pusher had no right treating you that way." Disgraceful, Hartford remained diplomatic. "Just a misunderstanding." "I'm sure bollocks," Simmons replied firmly. "That was discrimination, plain and simple. You should file a complaint." "When we land." Hartford smiled slightly. "There are more important battles to fight, Mr. Simmons." "Walter, please," the older man insisted. "And perhaps you're right. Still, in my day, there was more respect for the uniform." Their conversation continued as the remaining passengers boarded, with Walter sharing stories from his service days, and Hartford listening with genuine interest. Several passengers in nearby seats had begun eavesdropping, clearly intrigued by the uniformed guardsmen and the veterans. Animated recollections 30 minutes into the flight. Hartford and Walter were discussing the rigorous selection process for the Queen's Guard when a sudden commotion erupted several rows behind them. A flight attendant's voice cut through the ambient. "Noise of the cabin. Is there a doctor on board? We need medical assistance immediately." Hartford turned to see a flight attendant leaning over a passenger who appeared to have collapsed in the aisle without hesitation. He unbuckled his seatbelt and stood. "Excuse me," he said to Walter, who quickly moved his legs to allow Hartford to pass. Hartford moved swiftly toward the scene, his ceremonial uniform drawing all eyes as he approached the stricken passenger, a middle-aged man lying motionless on the floor, while a panicked woman, presumably his wife, clutched his hand. "I'm trained in emergency medical response," Hartford announced calmly to the flight attendant. "May I assist?" the flight attendant, her name tag reading. Sarah looked up with evident relief. "Yes, please." He just collapsed without warning. Hartford knelt beside the man, immediately checking for a pulse, finding none. His training took over. No pulse. He stated clearly, "I'm initiating CPR. Please notify the captain that we have a passenger in cardiac arrest." With practiced precision, Hartford repositioned the man flat on his back and began chest compressions. The ceremonial tunic restricted his movement somewhat, but he worked through the limitation, counting rhythm under his breath. 1, 2, 3, 4. The cabin had gone completely silent, except for Hartford's steady counting and the sound of compressions. Passengers watched wide-eyed as the Royal Guard, who many had dismissed as merely ceremonial, demonstrated life-saving medical skills with professional composure. When Sarah returned with the AED, Hartford quickly attached the pads to the man's chest. While maintaining his professional demeanor, the machine analyzed the heart rhythm, then advised a shock. Hartford ensured everyone was clear before delivering it after another cycle of CPR. Hartford checked for a pulse. Again, this time he felt a faint but definite beat beneath his fingers. "I have a pulse," he announced, the relief in the cabin palpable, weak but present. "Keep the AED attached and monitor closely." The captain's voice came over the intercom, confirming they were making an emergency landing at the nearest suitable airport. Meanwhile, Hartford continued monitoring the man's vital signs, his ceremonial uniform now slightly disheveled from the exertion of CPR, but his professional demeanor unwaveringly intact. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking." The intercom crackled to life. "We're making an emergency landing at Newcastle International Airport. Please remain seated with your seatbelts. Fastened. Cabin crew, prepare for landing." Hartford continued monitoring the revived passenger, whose name he'd learned was Richard Bennett. Though conscious, Bennett remained in critical condition, his breathing labored and pulse irregular. "Stay with me, Mr. Bennett," Hartford encouraged, quietly maintaining the calm, authoritative tone that characterized his military bearing. "Help is waiting for us on the ground." When the aircraft touched down, a collective sigh of relief swept through the cabin within minutes. The doors were opened and paramedics rushed aboard, medical equipment in hand, busted cardiac arrest. Hartford reported to the lead paramedic, "Patient lost consciousness and pulse approximately 20 minutes ago. CPR was administered immediately, followed by one shock from the onboard AED. Pulse returned, but remains weak and irregular." The lead paramedic nodded briskly, taking over the care of Bennett with professional efficiency as her team transferred him to a stretcher. She paused to address Hartford. "Your intervention was textbook perfect," she said. "Few more minutes without proper CPR." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Bennett's wife clutched Hartford's hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "How can we ever repay you?" "No repayment necessary, Mom. Hartford may," replied simply. "I'm just glad I could help." In the terminal, Hartford found a quiet corner away from the curious stares and continued gratitude of his fellow passengers. He checked his watch. The delay would make him late for his scheduled arrival. In Edinburgh, protocol required him to notify his commanding officer. He removed his mobile phone from an inner pocket of his tunic and dialed a number from memory. After 2 rings, a crisp voice answered. "Commander Blackwood, Sir Sergeant Hartford. Reporting, I'm experiencing a travel delay." Hartford Blackwood's authoritative voice carried through the line. "You should have landed in Edinburgh 20 minutes ago. The palace shows you're still en route." "Yes, sir. There was a medical emergency aboard. We've made an unscheduled landing at Newcastle, I see. Will this significantly impact your arrival time? Uncertain at this point, sir. The airline is assessing the situation." There was a brief pause before Blackwood continued, his tone shifting slightly. "Were you involved in this medical emergency, Sergeant?" "I provided assistance until paramedics arrived, sir." A knowing chuckle came through the line. Always the diplomat. The captain radioed in that one of his passengers, a royal guard, performed life-saving CPR mid-flight. "That would be you, I presume?" "Yes, sir. The passenger is stable and receiving medical care. Well done." Sergeant Blackwood's voice carried a rare note of approval. "Though I'm curious how you ended up in economy class. I distinctly recall authorizing business class for your travel." Hartford hesitated, weighing his response carefully. "There was a seating issue at departure, sir." "What kind of seating issue?" Blackwood pressed, his tone sharpening. "It's not of significant concern, Sir Hartford." Blackwood's voice took on the commanding edge that had earned him respect throughout the serviceful report. Now Hartford straightened instinctively, though Blackwood couldn't see him upon arrival at Heathrow. "My first-class reservation was questioned by airline staff. Despite presenting proper documentation, I was denied boarding in first class and reassigned to economy. On what grounds?" Blackwood demanded. The terminal manager expressed concerns about my uniform and questioned the legitimacy of my ticket. "Are you telling me," Blackwood's voice had dropped dangerously low, "that you were discriminated against because you were in ceremonial dress?" There seemed to be skepticism about whether a serviceman would be authorized for premium seating. "Sir, and you accepted this treatment?" There was no mistaking the displeasure in his commander's voice. "I deemed it inappropriate to create a scene." "Sir, the uniform represents something larger than any personal indignity." A long silence followed, during which Hartford could almost picture Blackwood's tightening expression, a look that had made new recruits tremble. "Your restraint is commendable, Sergeant," Blackwood finally said, his calm tone belying the anger Hartford could detect beneath the surface. "However, this isn't simply about personal dignity. It's about respect for the institution you represent." "Yes, sir. Which airline?" "British Airways, Sir. Terminal 5 at Heathrow." Names of those involved. Hartford provided the details without hesitation, including Coleman's full name and position. "I see," Blackwood replied, his voice now coldly professional. "Carry on with your journey to Edinburgh. When the aircraft is cleared, I'll handle this situation personally." Back at Heathrow, Martin Coleman was reviewing passenger manifests when his office phone rang. The caller ID displayed executive management, making him straighten immediately. "Coleman speaking," he answered professionally. "Martin, this is William Chambers, Director of Operations." The voice carried the weight of seniority and unmistakable tension. "I need you in my office immediately. Terminal 5 operations for British Airways are temporarily suspended." "Suspended?" Coleman repeated incredulously. "On what grounds? Just get to my office now." Coleman hurried through the terminal, Mind racing through potential crises, what he found in Chambers's office was entirely unexpected. The spacious corner office was crowded with serious-faced individuals, including Rebecca Norton from check-in, both security officers from the morning shift, and 3 people Coleman didn't recognize, 2 in suits displaying Civil Aviation Authority credentials, and a third man in a military uniform adorned with insignia that indicated high-rank Martin Coleman. Chambers began without preamble. "This is Commander James Blackwood of the Royal Guard and Representatives Adams and Taylor from the Civil Aviation Authority. They're here regarding an incident this morning involving Sergeant Thomas Hartford Coleman," faltered the name, not immediately registering. "I'm sorry, who the Queen's Guard you refused proper seating this morning." Commander Blackwood clarified, his voice carrying the precision of a blade. "The same guard who I'm told just saved a passenger's life during an emergency landing that might have been entirely avoided had he been allowed his assigned seat in first class." Coleman palled. As understanding dawned the man in the ceremonial uniform, that was a simple security precaution. "Our protocols. I've reviewed your protocols thoroughly," interrupted one of the CIA representatives. "None of them support discriminatory treatment based on military status or uniform. In fact, quite the opposite." Chambers gestured to a large screen on the wall, displaying security footage from that morning. "We've been reviewing the incident in detail. What I'm seeing is a distinguished serviceman being treated with suspicion and contempt, despite presenting valid documentation. Furthermore," Chambers continued, "I've learned this isn't an isolated incident. We've uncovered several similar complaints over the past 18 months, all involving military personnel, and all handled by your team." Mr. Coleman, the second CIA representative, spoke up. "Based on our preliminary review, we've determined that a complete operational audit is required. All flights from Terminal 5 will remain grounded until we can ensure proper protocols are being followed correctly and without discrimination." 2 days later, Sergeant Hartford stood at attention in Edinburgh's Holyrood House, his ceremonial duties completed without further incident as he prepared to return to London. An aide approached Sergeant Hartford. "You have visitors in the reception room." Hartford followed the aide to find Commander Blackwood waiting alongside a familiar face, William Chambers from British Airways. "At ease, Sergeant," Blackwood ordered as Hartford snapped to attention. "Mr. Chambers has something he'd like to discuss with you." Chambers stepped forward, his expression somber. "Sergeant Hartford, I've come personally to offer the airline's sincere apology for your treatment at Heathrow. It was unprofessional, discriminatory, and entirely inconsistent with our values." Hartford remained composed. "Thank you for the apology, sir. It's accepted. The situation revealed significant failures in our training and management." Chambers continued, "As a result, we've instituted comprehensive changes. Mr. Coleman has been removed from his position and Miss Norton has been reassigned pending sensitivity training." Blackwood watched Hartford carefully. "The CIA audit uncovered systematic issues beyond your individual case. The temporary grounding cost. British Airways approximately £4 million in operational losses." Hartford's expression betrayed a flicker of concern. "That wasn't my intention, sir." "Of course not," Chambers assured him, "but it may have been necessary. Sometimes systems need a significant shock to initiate real change." "There's more," Blackwood added. "Mr. Bennett, the passenger whose life you saved, has made a full recovery. His family has requested to meet you when you return to London." Hartford nodded, genuine relief crossing his features. "That's excellent news, sir." Chambers cleared his throat. "Sergeant, there's something else I'd like to discuss. The incident has prompted us to develop a new protocol for military personnel traveling on official duty. We'd value your input on its implementation." Hartford considered. "This thoughtfully. The delay in Newcastle may have been a blessing in disguise, sir. Had I been in first class, I might not have been in position to help Mr. Bennett when he needed it. Sometimes we're exactly where we need to be, even when it's not where we planned." Hartford replied simply, "Have you ever been judged unfairly based on your appearance? How do you handle situations where you're disrespected? Do you stand firm like our Royal Guard or address it differently? Share your experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective on this story. If you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button and bell icon so you never miss our daily uploads. Found this story inspiring? Share it with someone who appreciates tales of dignity and respect. Our previous videos are appearing on your screen right now. Check them out. Next, we'll see you tomorrow at the same time with another brand new story.